From Austin Film Festival, this is On Story, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. I'm your host, Barbara Morgan. This week on Story, we're joined by Academy Award-winning writer-director Brian Helgeland for a retrospective on the medieval action comedy A Knight's Tale.
I had to write a script, and I had no ideas, and I found the jousting book, and I read a line I hadn't read before that said you have to be of noble birth to compete. And the second I read that line, I thought, I know the whole movie.
On Story from Austin Film Festival. We'll be back in a moment. Hey, podcast listeners. I'm your host, Barbara Morgan, and you're listening to Austin Film Festival's On Story podcast. This week on Story, we're traveling back to the year 2001 for a conversation on A Knight's Tale with its writer-director, Brian Helgeland. This beloved medieval action comedy stars Heath Ledger as William Thatcher, a 14th-century squire with a talent for jousting who's determined to change his fate and escape his life of servitude. With the help of his fellow squires and the writer, Geoffrey Chaucer, William adopts a fake identity as a nobleman and competes his way up the ranks of the jousting tournaments, all while falling in love with a real noblewoman and keeping his true identity a secret. Helgeland broke into the industry by way of the horror genre, writing scripts for A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, and Tales from the Crypt. Helgeland won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for his work writing L.A. Confidential, a neo-noir crime thriller following three detectives trying to uncover a conspiracy within the corrupt L.A. Police Department. Helgeland made his directorial debut in 1999 with Payback, starring Mel Gibson, and continued writing in the thriller and neo-noir genres throughout his career, including Mystic River, Man on Fire, Green Zone, and Finestkind. I sat down with Brian Helgeland to talk about his experience writing A Knight's Tale as a spec script, directing Heath Ledger, and crafting the film's anachronistic stadium rock score. But before we dive in, we recommend you follow On Story wherever you get your podcasts. We know that finishing a screenplay isn't always a linear process. As a writer, sometimes you get knocked off your horse. But with their wide range of professional experience, writing across film and television, our guests are here to give you the encouragement you need to defeat writer's block and procrastination and get back in the arena. Clips of A Knight's Tale, courtesy of Columbia Pictures Industries, Inc. There's just such an incredibly creative, inspired idea at a time before people were mashing now with an old time. So it was way ahead of its time. And it's based on Chaucer, right? Not on the more well-known Shakespeare, right? So can you talk a bit about what were you thinking? Yeah.
Well, it's a complicated answer a bit, but I was trying to find some ideas to write for a movie. And this was because I had directed and I wanted to direct, and I had done a Tales from the Crypt. And I came across this book that was a history book that said jousting was a sport in the Middle Ages, which it was. And it was so popular that if there was wars sometimes being fought, would get put on hold so the knights could joust in tournaments. And I thought, that's interesting. I've never, for a sports movie, if it was going to be a sports movie, that's interesting. I like that. But what else do I do with it? And I just put it away and stopped work. Made a couple of little notes for a week, I'm going to write this movie. And then what is the movie? I don't know. But I directed a film called Payback. And I was at loggerheads with Paramount deep into post-production. We had recorded the score, and they wanted the ending changed and reshot. And of course, it stars Mel Gibson, who at that moment was the biggest movie star in the world. And it's about a move. The whole movie's about standing up for yourself, or it starts with a quote, what a principle is. And I just couldn't do it. And I said, I'm not going to give you a happy ending to this movie. So I got fired, and someone was hired to come in and shoot a happy ending for the movie. But before that happened, I was nominated for LA Confidential, and that was all going on in the background. And I knew Paramount was going to fire me, or I thought they were. And I thought to myself, if I win, they won't have the guts to fire me. They can't fire me if I win. And so that whole night at the Academy Awards, I was just like, I got to win this so they won't fire me. And I won. And I think it was a Sunday or a Monday. And the next day, Paramount fired me. So I was like, okay. And I was like, I've been fired off a movie that stars the biggest movie star in the world. No one's going to hire me ever to do anything. And I knew I had to write my way out somehow. I had to write a script that someone wanted to make. And I had no ideas, and I found the book. I was going through my library like, that's a terrible idea. Why did I come up with that idea? And I found the jousting book, and I hadn't looked at it in years, and I thought to myself, well, that's kind of cool. That could be cool. And I read a line I hadn't read before that said you have to be of noble birth to compete. And the second I read that line, and it's never happened to me before or since, but the second I read that line, I thought, oh, I know the whole movie.
What's your name, William? I'm asking you, William Thatcher, to answer me with your name. It's not Sir William, it's not Count or Duke or Earl William, it's certainly not King William.
I'm aware of that.
You have to be of noble birth to compete.
A detail. The landscape is food. Do you want to eat or don't you?
If the nobles find out who you are, there'll be the devil to pay.
And pray that they don't.
Buddy, you're a boy, make a big noise, playing in the street, gonna be a big man someday, you got mud on your face.
So obviously there's a whole lot of other pieces to this film that are more than just that original brilliant seed, right? That you decided to take that sport and actually make it a sports movie, but take that sport and then also add this whole love story, not just his ability, whether he could fight or not, but whether he was going to get this girl who is so beyond him, right? And then turn it into the era of music that it was, right? So, and I think that sounds crazy.
There was 100 ways that it could go wrong and maybe one or two ways that it could go right. But the way for it to go right was to go for it. And the idea was a lot of the songs are stadium rock songs. And whenever someone makes a medieval movie, they're always about freedom. We're going to get our freedom. No, you're not. We're going to get our freedom. And then they get their freedom, but in the next medieval movie, they've lost their freedom again, and they got to get their freedom again. And they never seem to quite hold on to it. And they just feel always like everything's elevated and, oh my gosh. And a lot of them are great, but people, I just thought people are, if they like sport, if that was a sport, it meant people went to it, it meant people cheered. And that's exactly the same thing. And I wanted to get across that idea. So I wanted to strip away the things about a medieval movie that distance you. Everything has always got a veneer over it in a medieval movie. Like I think a medieval movie in those terms, and not to rag, I love plenty of medieval movies, but it feels like that feels more fairy tale to me than this does, because this, I think you're there and you're with the characters, and that music was part of the choice of trying to get the excitement across. And it's also, to me, a rock and roll story. It's about youth and dreaming and aspirations, and it's a rock and roll movie. And so it felt like it needed that kind of music to it. And also, by the way, it's set in 1370 because the 70s are always the 70s. And it's a joke, but that was another thing with the production and the costume design. We tried to make them look like the Rolling Stones, much more than guys running around in tights. And it was that 70s kind of attitude. But people would say you can't have that music. And I'd say, okay, it's 1370. What should I have? Violins and cellos and all? And people would, yeah. And I say, well, in 1370, violins and cellos hadn't been invented yet, dude. And so why are instruments that are 300 years too soon right, and ones that are 600 years are wrong? So it's really movie rules.
So when you were picking all those songs, though, you're saying it was largely stadium music, but I mean, it just feels very curated. So, you know.
Yeah, I always make a playlist when I'm writing, and it takes a long time, and I listen to music at random, and I start to pick out songs that feel like they speak to the movie I'm writing. And I shouldn't say this, but music lyrics, if you do that, you'll start to find out your lyrics, your dialogue's all in the lyrics you're listening to, and you can rip them off. No one ever has called me on it. There's, every one of my films is filled with song lyrics that I've turned into dialogue. And I used to run a lot, and I had it on my Walkman, this almost track for track. And I would play it when I ran while I was writing it, and then they all went in.
Lady, I will win this tournament for you.
Nay, I will win for you.
My lady, may I present Count Adhemar, winner of the joust in Florence and high champion at Saint-Emilion.
All such moments forgotten, and standing before the most beautiful woman in Christendom.
Do you only pretend to fight, Count Adhemar? Or do you wage real war as well?
I am leader of the Free Companies. My army's in southern France, for the moment.
You added this, I think, what is the element that brings you forward each time, but also just puts you into the ring like you're talking about. And it's Paul Bettany as a WWF ringmaster, essentially. So, but he's Chaucer, right? And so again, this does seem like a crazy idea, but of course, probably nobody who saw this even knew who Chaucer was.
Yeah, not really.
You were never robbed, were you? Look, I have a gambling problem. I can't help myself. And these people, they'll quite literally take the clothes off your back.
What do you expect us to do about it?
He assured us that you, his liege, would pay us.
And who are you?
Peter, a humble pardoner and purveyor of religious relics.
How much does he owe you?
10 gold florins.
You manky git!
Paul Bettany he's just so engaging. So, I'd like to hear about his character because he's not the main character, but he is element that carries you all the way through.
Yeah. Well, he was alive in that era, and the Black Prince is alive. He's a real person. Chaucer's a real person. And around that time in the histories of Chaucer, there were 6 months of his life that are unaccounted for. No one knows where he was, what he was doing. And the rest of it is pretty much we know he was here, we know he was. And so immediately I thought, well, this is the 6 months that no one knows where Chaucer was. And it was a chance to write a writer character. But honestly, and I knew Paul. We had tried to do a movie earlier that couldn't get off the ground. And I wrote the part for Chaucer. It's the only part I ever wrote for an actor specifically, unless I was hired from the start with a known cast. But just sitting down to write, it's the only part I ever wrote for an actor. And I wrote it knowing Paul could do it. And if I didn't know Paul was playing that character, I never could have written it the way I did. But I knew he could do it.
So Heath Ledger, did you choose him directly, or was it? But you're saying you only wrote for Paul Bettany, but you hadn't written it for Heath Ledger. But he's the perfect person for that part.
Yeah. Well, Heath was doing The Patriot at the time, playing Mel's son in The Patriot. Small part, I think. He gets killed at the start, and he was on his. He didn't work very much, but he was running the show, so he couldn't escape that show. And he was going home to Australia. He had 2 weeks off, so he had a layover, and it was like a 4 or 5 hour layover at LAX in Los Angeles. So I went to meet him there, and we went to, I don't know if anyone's been to LA airport, there's a restaurant, or it used to be a restaurant there called Encounters. And it was like this big spider-shaped restaurant in the middle of the airport, and it revolves. And it was popular in the 70s, I guess. And we went to Encounters. I met him there, and he comes walking in with this long leather tube, about 8 feet long, cased. And it doesn't say anything, just puts it down, and people are eating, and I can't think anything about anything except what's in this tube. But we hit it off, and I liked him a lot, and he's a prince. You know, I've not met many people like that. And finally I said, "What's in the tube?" And he said, "Oh, that's my didgeridoo, mate." And I said, "What?" I had never heard of one. And he goes, "It's a didgeridoo." And he takes it out and he shows me. And he says, it's a musical instrument the Aborigines play. And I said, "Well, can you play it, or do you just like to walk around holding it?" And he was like, no, I can play it. And he took it out and he started, if you ever heard in the restaurant, and the whole restaurant kind of stops and everyone's turned, and Heath's just, and he finished and he looked up at me, and I said, if you do this movie, you got the part. And he was like, "Yeah, all right, I'll do it." Yeah. And then he was just gold.
Well, so the two other, Adamar is, am I saying that right?
Adamar, yeah.
Adamar, yeah. He's such a great bad guy. He's not very multidimensional. And I feel like you write very multidimensional characters. But I think it works perfectly because we hate him right from the start. I mean, he's so hateable. So I'm wondering how much you had originally written in there for this bad guy to drive the...
Yeah, there was a little bit more. And it's one of those editing room things is you realize you've done your job. And the more we stayed, we just wanted to get back to Heath or William. And when we cut to Adamar too much or stayed with him too much, it was like, we can't hate him any more than we already do. But he's playing it very disturbed also. There's something when he hits Heath, there's something very disturbing in his reactions and things like that.
He that strives to touch a star oft stumbles at a simple straw. You have been weighed. You have been measured. And you have been found wanting. One loss or another, William. In what world could you have ever beaten me?
Even his first scene where he comes in there, and you use him liberally. One of my favorite scenes is how angry he gets when they start the dance. Yeah. And how he just walks out like he's just a really just bad sport.
So what dance will you have? A Coranto? Or a bassa dancer?
Sir Ulrich, why don't you show us all a dance of your country? Show us a dance of Gelderland.
Oh. Yes, Gelderland.
Well, it's a lot like the Farandole, but with some differences. Well, you should bow. And...
And we talked about it a lot, and we just talked about how he's not, he's got issues, and we're not going to really say what they are. It's funny you mentioned that, because right when he walks outside, he says to someone, "I never understood music. It sounds like children fighting to me." But I had to get that line, and I had to cut away from the dance. So it didn't work. Yeah.
Because the dance is so great. Again, you kind of mashed a couple of things together there. It felt. Yeah.
Well, as far as the dance goes, that's the one song I changed because I wrote it as Casey and the Sunshine Band, Do a Little Dance. And they were rehearsing it. And it was an unbelievable experience to direct because it was like an old-fashioned movie. They had we had dance rehearsals over here, and we had 25 horses over here, and we had knights over here, and we're making tents, and it was an unrepeatable experience. But I was rushing to get down to the dance rehearsal, and we're going to start shooting in a few days. And the choreographer was there, and I walked in, and everyone was kind of weird. It was like a weird vibe. Stuart Hopps was the choreographer's name, who's the guy who says, he's the one that starts the dance off. And Heath walked over, and Heath could get you to do anything if he timed his smile right. And he'd tell you what he wanted to do, and you'd be like, and then he'd smile. And it was like, okay, we're doing it. And he said, can we do this to Golden Years instead of Casey and the Sunshine Band? And I said, I really don't, it's too late to change. And Heath said, no, it's the same beat. And he looks over at Stuart, and Stuart's just ashamed. And he's like, it's the same beat. And I said, well, let me see it. And they did it. And I'm like, that's great. Let's do Golden Years. But so we just got the track, and we couldn't get it broken down or anything. And Carter Burwell, who did the score, couldn't find a way to get the transition. And this is a true story. And so he lives in the West Village in New York, and he went for a walk, and it was like 11 o'clock at night, trying to figure out how he was going to get this thing that was unwieldy to work. It's no one on the street, and he's walking with his hands shoved in his pockets, and he looks up, and a man's walking towards him. And as the guy gets closer, it's David Bowie. And Carter stops him on the street and says, hey, I'm not crazy. I'm not a crazy fan. My name's Carter Burwell. I'm a composer. And Bowie's like, yeah. And he says, we got Golden Years. And he goes, oh, yeah, I remember we just made some money on Golden Years for a movie. And he says, well, let me come see it. And so the next thing he knows, Carter takes David up to his studio, shows him the scene. And Bowie goes, well, you need the stems. You need to break this apart. And he goes, yeah, but we can't. They wouldn't agree to that. You wouldn't agree to that somehow through lawyers or whatever. And David Bowie said, okay, you'll have it all tomorrow. And he wrote his address down and left. And the next day, all the separate tracks, the guitars and the vocals and that's how this movie was over and over again. It's the weirdest, unrepeatable thing that I've ever experienced. Yeah, no, it's had a funny journey. It was a modest hit when it came out. When it came out on DVD and, VHS at first, I guess. But the real life of it started then. And so I was a little, not bummed out, but I was a little disappointed it wasn't a bigger hit when it came out in theaters. And then it's taken on a life of its own, and it gets more popular almost every year since it was made. It's probably as popular now as it ever was, and maybe we'll see what happens down the road, but it's a gift, this movie. It's a gift. And if it's a gift to you, that's fantastic. I couldn't hope to have anything more said about a film that I made, that it inspired someone. But it's been a gift to me, it's been a gift to me. I always have it. Whatever happens, I'm like, I'm the guy that made Knight's Tale, And that's taken me a long way, that knowledge. And if you love it too, that's like the cake's got frosting on it. So thank you.
On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Kleberg Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story is also brought to you by Bogle Family Vineyards, 6th-generation farmers and 3rd-generation winemakers based in Clarksburg, California. Makers of sustainably grown wines that are a reflection of their family values since 1968. The project is supported in part by the Texas Commission on the Arts. This show is produced by myself, Barbara Morgan, Elizabeth Mims, and Emily Locke. Our associate producer is Freya Neely, and our editor is Anna Kolarova. Music is by Brian Ramos. Copywriting by Mazzy Smallwood. Production assistance comes from Dennis Moniger, Travis Kennedy Sound, Film is Eddie, and KUT 90.5 in Austin. Go to austinfilmfestival.com to learn more about Austin Film Festival and Conference each October. Until next time, I'm Barbara Morgan, and this has been Austin Film Festival's On Story.